Here's an example of Aлекhine's defense played by Alexander Alekhine that he wins. Now, the Aлекhine's defense is this knight to f6, e4 and f6 with this. What happens is that white is trying to control the center, black tries to provoke him, but in this case, Maroczy, who played this in New York, decides to say, I'm going to play the center and not push that pawn. Well, now Alekhine pushes his pawn to e5 to control the center with this, so it's not a true Alekhine when he pushes the pawn to e5 and makes the knight move. So white continues with the development on the king side and plays f4, trying to get the knight behind that pawn. Alekhine develops his other knight to c6. There's the knight to f3, ready to develop. Then black controls the center with the d5 and doesn't mind the exchange, so when pawn takes pawn, the knight takes pawn. And then white wants to continue development and also wants to trade, so the pawn is now taken, and now Alekhine pins that knight with bishop to g4. Well, then white's got to stop the exchange and plays the bishop to e2, but Alekhine still takes the knight with f3, allowing the bishop to take and controls this long diagonal with this. Black now brings his queen out to check with queen to h4. The king's got to move, and now black castles queen side, so he gets the rook in the game, and his king is now safe. White's behind in development, brings out his knight to c3. Black continues his development and gets his bishop to c5. Really controls that king side with that. So white's trying to trade off or get something controlled in the center, so he plays the knight to e4 and wants to trade that bishop. But the next thing that Alekhine does is brings his knight to e3, forking the queen and king. That forces the exchange of the bishop taking the knight, and now the bishop takes the bishop with this. So white is now trying to trade off queens and trying to get an endgame. He plays queen to e1, but Alekhine isn't going to trade. He's going to move his bishop. He's going to play something like queen to h6. Now, a dubious move for white is playing knight to g3 with this, and then when that is played, for example, black gets his knight down to d4, controlling the center with this. White tries to get his queen out to b4 on the queen side to attack with this. Black sees an attempt to checkmate. After all, queen is threatening to take the pawn checkmate with this. So black stops it with c6. The pawn stops it with that. Well, then white goes queen to a4, trying to go after the other pawn on the queen side with this. But then a continuation of the king over to the queen side, b8 holds everything. And now a mistake is made in that white brings his rook to d1. This isn't very good. He should have pushed c3 to kick the knight back with this. Alekhine brings his other rook into the center, and e8 controls the center and ready to win something with this. So what we're having now was the white's pushing down h4 so he can get some room on the king side with that. Black and Alekhine brings his queen to f4. He's threatening the knight on g3 with this, so white has to hold the knight so he doesn't lose it, so he plays rook to h3 to hold there with that. Well, at this point with this, well, black attacks the queen with b5. The white queen has to move or counterplay. The counterplay is to attack black's queen, and that's what white does, but Alekhine sees that, says, I don't mind, I'll exchange queens. So when the pawn takes the one queen, and then on white, the knight takes Alekhine's queen, then Alekhine takes the knight with this and is up a piece. White tries to kick back the knight at c3. The knight takes the bishop on f3 with the knight's trade. The rook takes the knight. Alekhine looks at this as, well, I win a pawn. Bishop takes pawn. And now white's got his last pawn and he thinks he can take with this. But after rook to f8, if you exchange the rooks, black is winning with this. He can't move the rook without moving the check. White now resigns.